about the African presence in the New
Kemet
World.
was founded by the black population
The
from
African
the heart
presence
of
in the
Africa.
New World did
As
not
such,
begin
today's
with slavery.
Afro-Americans can
2,000
identify
years
and
before
take
Columbus,
pride in this great civilization
Africans were
in
shaping
the same
the
way
course of
Europeans can look to
civilizations
ancient
that would
Greece
later be known as
or Rome.
Aztec, Incan, and Mayan.
If a typical
This
Kemetic
work of art
citizen lived in
is
our
found in
society, he
Boston's
would be called
Roxbury
black
section.
or Afro-American.
Its creator, John
One
Wilson,
sees the
was
faces of their
inspired by
royalty in
similar
our
works of art
contemporaries.
he saw in Mexico.
Menes, the first
These
king
striking
in history.
stone tributes dispel any theory that does not place
Zauser,
blacks in the New
the
World,
first to construct
not only
pyramids.
before Columbus, but before Christ.
Queen
They
Ka,
date as early
mother
as
of
600
Akhenaten.
BC. Note the Ethiopian like braids. These monuments are concurrent with the Kushite 25th dynasty of Kemet. They were erected by the Olmecs, a civilization which is the foundation of the Aztec, Incan, and Mayan cultures. The colossal stone evidence is supported by numerous figures from the Olmec and subsequent cultures in ancient America that insist upon an African presence. Their attire and broad features leave no doubt as to the origin of the subjects. The pyramids produced by the ancient Americans were indeed influenced by Africa's own. Even today, strong currents off the coast of Africa will sail any sturdy vessel to the Caribbean. Vessels such as Queen Hatshepsut's obelisk boat had been constructed in Kemet 700 years before, clearly demonstrating the maritime ability of Kemet. These constructions have been shown to be sturdy enough to make the transatlantic voyage. When Columbus returned to Europe after his second voyage to America, he reported that the Indians had told him of blacks who had settled in the area. It's true. Africans came first to America not as slaves, but as masters of science and technology, influencing the civilizations that Columbus and Cortez were to find.
Little note here we'd like to give you. If you're interested in finding out more about the legacy left by the ancient Africans, we have a list of books that we can offer you. You should just send your inquiries to Stolen Legacy Bibliography, WLVI-TV, 75 Morrissey Boulevard, Boston, 02125. And we are going to be taking your phone calls now. 288-3120 is the number, so if you have a question of my guests, please call 288-3120. Again, that number is 288-3120. Sam, now we're skipping here, but about the African presence in the Americas, what was so significant about that?
Well, first we want to point out that slavery had three components to it. There is, of course, the physical slavery, which is ended. There was the removal of the goodies from Africa, the mineral wealth. And then there was a mental bondage that was imposed upon the African mind. That is a cultural lobotomy of sorts that removed history and removed any value from the personage of the African. And what we're trying to do now is re-heritorize Africans. That is to show that Africans played a major role in the creation of civilization and the furthering of civilization throughout the history of mankind.
Okay. You want to add to that, Asa?
Well, the only thing is that, in the first place, we're indebted very much to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima for much of the information that has been synthesized to help us to understand the proof of the fact that ancient Africans actually appeared around 700 or so years before Christ in America. And of course, we're one of the few people who have the physical remains, in effect, rock Polaroids of the pictures of these Africans that did that. Might also add that LeGrand Clegg in Los Angeles is one of the top scholars who has helped to uncover much of this information about the African influence on the Olmec. But what I want to clarify, just so that any of your viewers are trying to put this together with what they know about Olmec, what we're saying is that Africans influenced Olmecs, not that Africans were Olmecs.
Okay.
That Africans appear in small numbers, and then after a short period of time, the elements of African culture began to be disseminated throughout the Olmec and later world, such as pyramid would be a case in point. Pyramids don't appear in America until after the African Olmec contact.
Okay. Well, let's go to the phones and see what kinds of questions our guests have. Good evening. You're on the air. What's your question?
I wanted to ask, we're being told a lot of things that Africans have done before others. I wanted to know how you would answer critics who say the things that you're telling us are wrong or they're not valid.
Good point. Asa, you want to try that?
Well, since we've been talking about lots of things, I would have to know which thing the critic would say would be wrong.
Well, I think what he's trying to say is, thank you very much for your call. What he's trying to say is that, you know, just everything that we're talking about here, I mean, we're talking about rewriting history books.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the history books say one thing, and we're sitting here saying another. So what gives here? Who's to say that what you're saying is right and what the history book says is wrong?
Well, again, most of the things that we're saying here today, for example, if we say that Greek people went to Africa to study, we're simply quoting the record of Greek people. In other words, these are not new items of information that we just simply manufactured. You will see in Plutarch's Lives, for example, in Plutarch's work on that the reference to Pythagoras going to study astronomy and mathematics in Egypt is clear. That comes from the Greek or the Roman side before it ever comes from the Kemetic side. So that, in other words, there are many elements of documentation that we could easily share. The easiest way to deal with anyone who would criticize the information, however, is for the critic to specify the thing about which they have some disagreement and then allow us to marshal the evidence to support that. But I agree with the caller. I fully expect that some people have to sit back and say, well, how could this be true?
But then we can all say that history is one man's interpretation anyway. Let's go to another call. Good evening. What's your question?
My question is, I would like to know, how do we get society to acknowledge the African origin of modern civilization in today's textbooks?
Ace, well, Sam, why don't you try that, being a school teacher?
That's a good question. As a matter of fact, you see, there is now a crack in the wall of the racism that separates Africans from their true heritage. And there's what I call the translucent history that's now being written. If you take a look now at a modern history book of U.S. history, you will find references to Africans, though not put in any historical context. For instance, you'll see references to Africans being with Columbus, though they won't mention that one of the pilots of one of the ships was an African. They'll say that he had Africans with him. They'll say the same thing about Cortez, and they will not tell you that these Africans were not just along for the ride, but in fact had directions along with them.
Okay. Do we have another call? I think we should go to line 0, all right? Good evening. What's your question?
Yes, I'd like to know if African influence extended onto the Far East.
The African influence in the Far East is what he's saying. Thank you so much for your call.
Okay, I'm really happy that he asked that question. I wish I had better detailed information, but let me make a reference to the fact that that you have a series of migrations coming out of Africa, first to populate the world. In other words, early man starts in Africa, so of necessity, the first people in all these early places were basically African. However, I think he's talking more about the modern period, and it is through the work of people like Runoko Rashidi and Wayne Chandler and others who specialize in the history of the African presence in Asia, who spell out the details to show, for example, that the earliest population in India is the Dravidian population in India, which is a basic African population. Even in China, as Runoko Rashidi points out in his work, The African Presence in Early Asia, at least one of the dynasties, the Shang dynasty, around 2000, if I'm not mistaken, it's around 2000 BC, was an actual black African dynasty. In fact, they were referred to as oily black people. And so there is, throughout Asia, in the Middle East, and there are military people who have gone to places like Vietnam and who have seen some of the people in Vietnam and been shocked to find their dark color, even after years and years of separation from it.
Well, if you write in for the bibliography, we do have a book on that list that talks about the African influence in Asia. Let's go to another call. Good evening. What's your question?
Hi. I'd like to know, if Egyptians were of black African influence, why aren't they portrayed in most Egyptian art that I've seen with black skin or dark skin?
Oh, thank you. Let me handle that.
Hey, so you want to handle that? Thank you so much for your call.
Yeah, I really want to thank him for that. you have to realize that most Egyptian art that is sent to us, we see out of chronological order. For example, if you go to the British Museum, you will see the museum is set up so that you see mostly Greco-Roman material, but it's side by side, let's say, with an 18th dynasty piece. If you really want to see the black origin of Egypt, you will look first at the mummies, the actual royal mummies. Look at all the royal mummies of the 18th dynasty. For example, every one we have is not only dark, but black, very black. If you look at the artwork, we showed some of the artwork in the earlier segments. You saw the picture of the Sphinx from the side view, totally black. You saw Pharaoh Senwosret or Usertsen, totally black. In other words, if you do Old Kingdom first, and if you do kings and queens, then do Middle Kingdom, then do 18th dynasty, and then after that come to the Greco-Roman dynasty, which is in the classical period, you will see that it goes from black to the time of the Greco-Romans when you see royal kings like Alexander the Great, who is white.
Sure. Has nothing to do with disease or anything else. Let's go to another call. Good evening. You're on the air.
Yes. Good afternoon. Good evening. I agree with them, and of course, Professor Joseph Jonkerman in New York City agree with them. Do they believe that Freemasonry started in Africa?
Which of you want to tackle that? You want to try that, Sam?
Maybe Asa can finish it off. Yeah.
Thank you for the call.
First off, as I've said, the term itself, Mason, is an African one. The problem that exists is that the mystery system that Freemasonry developed out of had to be suppressed at one point during European history, and the participants had to go underground.
Okay. Asa?
Right. Well, Sam is correct. See, we know that there was first an ancient educational system that is fairly fully described right now that was located with its center at a place that today is called Luxor. Or Waset was the old name of the city. That's where the temple of Ipet Isut, which is Karnak today, and Luxor are. And this was kind of a headquarters for a giant university system that peaked in the 18th dynasty around between 1500 and 1300 BC. That system was the system that Greek people encountered operating at the time that they became acquainted with Africa. They were very much impressed by that system. And within a short period of time, they entered that system and adopted its tenets and especially its religion, which meant you had to adopt its educational system too. So that for almost 600 years, the dominant religion in Greece and Rome, before and after the time of Christ, 300 years before, 300 years after, the dominant religion was the religion of Isis, which was suppressed when the church was established by Constantine in approximately 325 AD, I think it was, when the Council of Nicaea was called. That meant they had to drive underground the Kemetic worshipers and initiates and education. And then we have, after that period of time, time and time again, a return to the ancient Egyptian wisdom through secret societies. And if you'll notice in the Masonic order, almost all of their symbols come out of ancient Kemet. Now, as to whether or not it started there or not, I don't have enough knowledge to know, but the circumstantial case is so heavy that we would be wrong to consider almost any other alternative.
All right, we're going to stop here and take another break, but we will be taking more of your phone calls in our next segment, so stay with us. We'll be right back. All right, let's go back to the phones. Hello, you're on the air. What's your question?
Hello, I'm very interested in this subject, and I'd just like to know why were African ideas stolen instead of adopted, and what did the Greeks have to gain by stealing these ideas instead of giving full credit to the African society?